Bruce, let's jump back into this story. You wake up, you're on some kind of a on-board hospitals scenario where what you describe as non-human doctors, I'm using air quotes around that, are doing some stuff that is against your will. Are they taking biological samples? What are they up to?
George, the reason why I can't answer that question for this particular experience is because of what happened next. I think I spoke up and there was some influence. I felt like a gentle pressure on my chest, but immediately I felt I was being pushed down on the table. And I don't know if this was an alien hand on my chest or there was, again, another example of this control mechanism I keep speaking of. But I couldn't resist it. I had no will to, as fascinating as the scene that was unfolding in front of me was, I had no power to resist this force, and I let myself be pushed back down on the table, laid down on the table, and immediately became unconscious. So the answer to your question is I don't know for this particular abduction exactly what happened to me.
But you do have some theories about it based on what happens at other times, right?
Yes. Yes, I do. I know that a number of investigators have raised this theory about the intergenerational nature of the alien abduction phenomenon. There's some interest that the aliens have in certain bloodlines. Now, I think there must be something in our genes. I don't know if it has to do with immunity or maybe some latent cognitive traits or extrasensory abilities that some people may have. But I know that all I can speculate is that during the generation that I was a part of, where the aliens were abducting a lot of people in the 60s, one of the things they might have been interested in was learning about the human mind, how the human brain functions, and trying to study and map and learn how to read the human mind, perhaps for purely scientific purposes, or alternatively, to be able to control the human mind and human beings by first understanding human neurophysiology. And I think that was part of their purpose, and that has something to do, at least that's my theory, with why they implant so many abductees. So many abductees receive implants in the region of their head, the ears, the nose, and sometimes in the corner of the eye. So I think that may be the reason, simply to study human brain function, and that's what I might have been a part of at that time.
You think that they put an implant in your nose, right? You think they put an implant in your nose, as have been reported all over the world, right?
Yes, I do, because that's what I remember. This memory. If I could talk a little bit about this, is another example of this missing time where I had an implant, but I can't remember part of the episode where I obtained the implant. The only thing I had is a fragment of a memory, a flashback. Again, it was at the age of 6. I was walking in the hallway of our apartment. I just had a flashback and remembered a spherical, like a BB, 2 to 3 millimeter diameter implant with studs or projections, kind of like a thimble. I don't know if people out there do any sewing know that the thimble has these little studded projections, and the only thing that grounds that memory in reality is because I had an associated memory that had a really strong emotional component. I was afraid that either I had sneezed or blown my nose too hard, and the implant had come out, or someone had warned me if I blew my nose too hard or if I sneezed too forcefully, the implant could come out, and I should be careful. Now, again, this is bereft of any context, but it persuades me that this really happened to me, that I did have a nasal implant. That's how I knew it was a nasal implant, because of the worry about it coming out if I sneezed or blew my nose. So, again, that one particular memory I have at a young age is what persuades me that, yes, I was one of those. Can't say that all abductees have these implants, but I believe that I was one of them.
So, over the years, people like Dr. Roger Lear, the late Dr. Lear, had been my guest on this program and other encounters I had with him over the years.
Mm-hmm.
He's a podiatrist. He takes suspected implants out of people's feet and does some analysis on them. Your idea is a little different from what has been discussed about the purpose of implants. It's generally assumed that it was some kind of a tracking device over the years, and maybe that is why the ones in people's noses and heads are put in there too. But you theorize that it was a matter of brain control, or at least brain monitoring. That putting these things in our heads allows them, whoever they are, to watch what's going on in our minds and perhaps to control them. Right?
Exactly. The tracking could be one of the functions. It could have multiple functions, but I think the main function is these implants, especially if they're implanted in the head. I mentioned, and I'm not the only abductee, but many abductees have mentioned how they felt controlled by the aliens. When they're on board the UFO, they feel there's no resisting them. So they just give in. I lo and behold, many of the abductees have implants in the head region and in the nasal cavity, and possibly even in the brain. And that's why I consider the possibility. I've kind of thought about the theory that implant function mainly is that of a brain-computer interface, which companies like Elon Musk, Neuralink are working with and developing devices that are implanted in the brain that can help people that are maybe they've lost the ability to speak because they've had a stroke or they've had a spinal injury, and they can use these implants to restore this function. But I think there's a lot of evidence that these implants have this function of helping the aliens read our minds, map the human mind, maybe even download what we're thinking, what's everything that is in the human brain, or every mental activity, possibly for the purposes of learning how to control them, human beings, and control human behavior. That is part of my theory.
You get into in your book the likelihood that they have taken some samples from your DNA in very specific sort of ways, and this has been discussed by Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, John Mack over the years, that maybe they're building a new and improved human species, a hybrid species, which, some speculate maybe they're trying to help us get through the tough times that are coming because of climate change or what other disasters, or maybe they're building a replacement species, something that is meant to supersede us, to be here when the rest of us are gone. What do you think?
Well, that's part of what I call a worse. I have a main hypothesis that they're doing what they're doing for our benefit, but the alternative hypothesis I speak about is a little bit more worrisome one. I don't, from all of my UFO alien abduction experiences, I have no direct evidence of that from my limited experience. But some investigators do. And I can't say every investigator has evidence that, there is a program where we are that we will be replaced. All I know is there is certainly abundant amount of evidence for a reproductive program, that a new transgenic human species has been created, and I frankly think that we should hope for the best, but plan for the worst, and therefore try to learn as much as we can about alien biology. If there are, we think we have crashed alien UFOs that are being reverse engineered. If there are alien entities that in the possession of the government, their biology should be studied, as well as that of the transgenics, if they can be identified.
Here's what I've heard other people say. Debunkers have said this when they hear this hybrid species stuff. They said, well, this can't be. There's no way that our DNA could be mixed with something from some other planet, other solar system. There's no way that could be compatible. That wouldn't work. Well, you're the biologist, so you tell me if that is doable or not. And then the second part is that they would say, well, if these aliens are so advanced they can travel from distant star systems and get here, surely they wouldn't need to take our DNA samples again and again in order to create some hybrid or alternative species. They could just take one sample and reproduce it because they'd be smart enough in biology to know all that stuff.
Well, again, what the first repeat the first question again?
Well, the idea that they would be so different from us, given that they were from some other star system way, way out there, that there's no way our human DNA and alien DNA could ever be mixed and come up with a hybrid species. They'd be too different.
Right. I have I don't think anyone has any evidence of the nature of the DNA. They could be stably integrating genetic sequences that are human, but that are modified to confer traits that human beings don't have, to make us better than we were. There's no reason to think that they're using their own alien DNA, and we're not even sure who the aliens are. The only, or I should say, most of the studies show that it's the gray aliens that are interacting with human beings, and those are humanoid to begin with. They may be a species that was created from one of our early ancestors. So they could be their DNA could be very similar. 95 to 99% of their DNA could be similar to our own. So there's no evidence to think that if
so there's too many unknowns to really make a judgment on those kind of questions.
There's no reason to think that they're trying to modify us using alien DNA that's very different from any human being, Homo sapiens DNA, or any mammalian DNA. And the second point is, this reproductive program, we don't know what the purpose is of the program is. We don't know what the alien agenda is. They may need to create as many transgenic humans for some particular purpose, but they need them to be not clones of each other using the same DNA, but they need them to be different. So in other words, they're not clones, so that they can be secreted in human society, covertly hidden, so as to blend in. So I think that basically, if they do have certain target genes that they want to increase in frequency in the human population, they have to really obtain as many subjects as possible, so they could get the DNA into as many people in the general population as possible, ultimately through normal reproduction between the transgenics and the general population.
You mentioned in the book that your grandfather had a unique condition that hints to you that maybe he was interacting with them as well, which goes along with the theme. It's a multi-generational thing, that whoever they are, they take families from one generation to the next. What about your parents?
Oh, that's a good question. I have I didn't really put it in the book, but, my mother has had one or two experiences that are suggestive that she might have interacted with these beings. Very few. My father, I can't really say that have any, that he's talked about any experiences. He might have had them as a child, but never told any of us. All I know is, due to the fact that these nasal implants can have adverse medical consequences, many of the abductees complain of all their lives having chronic sinusitis, sinus headaches, and he did complain of that for his entire life. So again, that's indirect evidence. But I have nothing more direct to suggest that my parents were, in effect, part of the program.
The idea of these implants in our heads being a way to either track us or affect or monitor our brain activity, it might be a way to figure out how to control us, and that they inject these things in some humans as a way to figure out techniques that would work on a mass audience. You get into that a little bit, and it's kind of spooky when you think that there might be some force out there, some other race that wants to control us on a mass level. You get into the idea of free will, how it could be controlled.
Yes, I thought it was very practical. There's one purpose, was a very practical purpose, to manage the abductees. They may need to, again, try to create this new species, and they need to control the abductees, with these implants. But there may also be a more sinister, broader purpose for the implants, perhaps, and that is to gain control over more and more members of our species. And that's something I did talk about in the book, and have no other no more direct evidence of that. But
well, I don't know.
That is a concern.
I think there's evidence in the newspaper every day. I mean, you look at humanity, and we make really stupid decisions and ignore evidence about direct threats and major challenges for our planet and our species, and we just go about our way and kind of shine it on, and not only don't pay attention to it, but dispute it. It's like witchcraft, like a spell was cast over our brains or something. But I'm getting off the track here.
George, no, you're absolutely right. I think about the very point you just made almost every day. You're absolutely right. I don't want to add anything more to that because you said it very well.
We're talking with Dr. Bruce Rapuano about his book, Dominion Lost. I tell you, Bruce, the lawyer in you put together a heck of a compelling case about the other events that happened in that year, that key year for you, 1965, when this stuff really started for you. It was a major outbreak of UFO activity all across North America, including some really dramatic cases. I had forgotten about some of them. Over military installations and key facilities and major cities. And I know we're going to open up the phone lines in the next segment, but when we come back, I don't know if it's a coincidence that all that happened at the same time, but I'd like you to get into that a little bit, and then we'll take some calls from our listeners. Bruce, there's a bunch of people on the phones wanting to talk to you. Before we get there, though, I do want to touch on the other part of the 1965 series of events. The year that this happened to you, that you first remember it, was a heck of a year in UFO history. These things come in waves, at least they used to, and 1965 started a wave that lasted for 2 years. You make a really compelling case there with a bunch of evidence from government documents, from public sources, that I had forgotten about some of those things. But wow, that was a heck of a year. Can you tell us a little bit about it, a thumbnail version, before we go to the phones?
It was an amazing year, the wave of 1965. And what I was fascinated with was within a month or two of my sighting, there were visitations at so many military bases in Wyoming, Colorado, at interim NORAD headquarters, and they all seemed, these sightings, and this went all the way from those states to Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, all seemed to focus on not only military bases, but bases where there were nuclear weapons, ICBMs. I even talked about the incident at Exeter, where all of those sightings fascinating close encounters that were in John G. Fuller's book, Incident at Exeter, took place very close to where nuclear weapons and nuclear materials, weapons delivery systems were stored. So it seems as if some alien civilization was doing a surveillance program of our nuclear capabilities, see how we were developing, and maybe to let us know that they have advanced technology that may be superior to ours, to kind of let us know that they were in the neighborhood. But it seemed like those sightings were really part of an organized pattern of activity within, like I say, a month or two of my sighting. And I had forgotten that as well, George, but I was very impressed with the quality of those sightings.
Yeah, it was good. We call them aliens, and people think that automatically means space aliens, ETs. What we can say is they're not us. It's a non-human intelligence. Right. At least the little beings that you saw were non-human. But can we say that they're from somewhere else? Couldn't they live here?
Well, I have to say there's a lot of evidence of that. People are talking about bases in Antarctica. And, we've explored more of outer space than we have of our oceans. And there's a wealth of evidence that UFOs are capable of transmedium travel. They can travel from the atmosphere into the oceans and vice versa. And perhaps they've been hiding out for generations or more in some of the more unexplored parts of our planet. At least I'm very sympathetic to that theory. There's a lot of evidence to support it.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the records, it seems like they've been with us throughout human history. I don't know. It seems like they live here as much as we do. Maybe they've been here longer.
Very possible. I hope that means that they're willing to tolerate us a little bit longer.
Yeah, we're crossing our fingers on that. We'll take a couple of calls if you don't mind. We'll go wild card line. Brendan in Austin, Texas. Hey, Brendan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Hopefully I sound good, George and Dr. Rapuano.
Yeah, you sound good. What's on your mind?
Okay, excellent. I've got a whopper, so I've got to get going here. I hope I can talk to you guys, contact you guys. I don't know exactly what is safe to say and what not to say, but I don't know if I should write a book or a podcast or do a podcast, but I'm glad you're feeling better, George. Everybody needs to listen to Weaponized. That's his podcast. All right, so here we go. Everybody turn me up here. They control us through our limbic system, which is part of our reptilian brain with electricity and sound. As well, there's another region of the brain that another high-caliber scientist, such as yourself, cited about 2 years ago that matched my own research. There's good and bad ET. George, I don't know if you remember the time I called in and I talked about a gray, ape-like, shape-shifting ET that infiltrated my friend's campsite, and it kept covering its face. Everybody else around me got turned off, and I was the only one that was still awake. And I think that my implant, because I have an implant, or did at one point, that it protected me, and that there's good implants and bad implants, like ET. The implant I had was like a BB behind my ear, and it's kind of close to the lymph node, but not the same spot. And I got rear-ended by a semi-truck in June at a red light, and I had to get an MRI. It was my first ever MRI. I woke up with a scab behind my ear in a straight line that was curved around my face. How do you do a straight line on a curve? But anyways, I had a phone call that morning, and they told me that my MRI was scheduled. So they knew my MRI was scheduled before I even did, and they took it out before then. And humans have an implant technique called a cochlear implant, and people kept on telling me this just serendipitously. I was like, oh, yeah, that's very interesting. They do a transition behind the ear called a transmastoid approach, and it kind of sounds like a mantoid, right? Transmastoid. That's kind of a coincidence, but they attach the implant where the nerves that carry the sound are in the ear so that the deaf can hear again. So I assume that they have a very similar type of implant that they put in the same region that the electricity going through the nerve goes to the implant and they can hear what you're hearing. So that leads me to my questions, and thank you so much. do you know how you can tell if your friends or family are being taken? And you mentioned your 8-year-old self, and George mentioned your career with synchronicity. Do you think that there's a synchronistic relation to this, and it's like a breadcrumb trail? Because I just keep on having all this information given to me. I don't know what to do with it. They keep on giving it to me.
Sometimes I really felt in writing the book that someone else was writing it for me. I seemed to find all the answers so quickly. Everything made sense. Everything seemed to form a coherent narrative. I know Whitley Strieber, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. Whitley Strieber has claimed that since he's had his implant and he's never had it removed, his ability to do research in areas where he has no training has really taken off, and he attributes it to the fact that he has this implant in the lobe of his ear. So, look, I can't rule anything out at this point. I think we're just scratching the surface. What we know is really the tip of the iceberg in terms of this technology that aliens are used to study humans or control humans. I don't know which. But I'm very sympathetic to theories like the one you've expressed.
Brendan was asking about how do you tell if your friends or family members are having the similar experiences, and I know your family had some experiences, Bruce, that you write about them.
Yeah, if you have family members that have any medical consequences that are very commonly reported by abductees. Find blood in the pillow, strange, unexplained nosebleeds. If they complain about episodes of missing time or strange dreams, there's a group of investigators in the 80s that had a roper poll where they identified all of the most often reported signs that you were abducted, and I think they included missing time, waking up with a strange figure in the room, feelings of flying, out of body experiences. A lot of these unusual experiences that we can't explain have been associated with the alien abduction phenomenon. And I would direct you to the work of investigators such as Dr. John Mack and David Jacobs that can talk about this in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Brendan, for the call. We're going east of the Rockies to Serge in Montreal. Hi, Serge. Welcome to Coast.
Hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you, and you too.
Good. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to tell you about what happened to me in '62, because my mother and I were reading books about extraterrestrials, and she said, read this book. It's about extraterrestrials that are communicating with each other by telepathy. So I said to myself, well, I won't waste my time reading the book. I will try it. So that's what I did. I tried that, and I was forcing my head. And then when I finished, I was a little bit dizzy. My mother called me. She said, come quick to the living room. I'm seeing a flying saucer. So I went there. I saw it. And when I seen it, it disappeared because they didn't want to cause a accident or accidents. So they disappeared. And I thank them for acknowledging that I had communicated to them. But they didn't communicate to me telepathically. But in '79, when our father sold the house, the police came to us. I was living with my two brothers and sister in an apartment building. Anyway, they came and they said, are you the one who communicated with extraterrestrials in '62? I said, yes. So he said, well, come to us. So I went there, and my parents were there, and the new proprietor was there, but the house wasn't there anymore. Huh. And we didn't have the technology to take away a house in one night. And there were no scraps of dirt. The street was clean. So, and there was a hole from the sidewalk about 20 feet deep, facing north. The east side of the fence 20 feet deep, the south fence 20 feet deep, and the east side, there was a slope going down. And on the slope, about 8 feet wide, there was a little pail and a little shovel of plastic, those who could be pliable. Anyway, I was told to dig there, and I dug, and I took out a coffer about 1 foot and 6 inches long, about 4 or 5 inches thick, and about 8 inches wide. And it was all around except in the bottom, full of jewels, and inside too.
I tell you what, Serge, we're going to have to cut this story a little bit short. We got a lot of folks on the line still. That's a heck of an encounter. Some of that, Bruce, sounds like screen memory stuff. I'm not sure if if it all happened as he describes. I'm sure he's telling us how he remembers it. But I know that you had, you had experiences, and other members of your family had experiences back then that were, and you had experiences that you figured out were screen memories, and also had communications like Serge did, where you had a question in your brain and somehow they, on board these ships, figured out what you were asking, right?
You're exactly right, George. And, I think they have these abilities, and I remember having the experience of just asking the question in my mind, and it was answered for me telepathically. So there's just so many reports like the one Serge has just related to us throughout the UFO abduction literature. So it's not something we haven't seen and heard before.
You know, there are a lot of people who've had experiences where they, in a sense, try to call them in and have had some success. At least they claim some success. Have you ever tried something like that?
George,
where you go out and concentrate on the cosmos and say, hey, if you're out there, come and show yourself, anything like that?
Well, the answer is no. I know Dr. Stephen Greer has done a lot of that, but I haven't really contacted him to be part of the group that he has. Something I've never thought of doing, to be honest with you.
We'll try to get one more call in. Victor in Salem, Oregon, on the wild card line. Hi, Victor. We've got like 2 minutes left if you want to share your question or comment. All righty.
I, too, was abducted, but I have a different take. I don't think it's a hybridization program because that doesn't sound logical. How would they introduce people? You have to have a work history. You have to have a family history. You have to have, a birth certificate in order to enter this society.
Okay, what do you think it is then?
I think, from what I understand, is they have a precognitive idea of what the future is. And they have chosen certain people and their families because in some ways they are going to have an effect on future generations that maybe perhaps they are manipulating the future to have a certain turnout. Because that's the only thing that makes logical sense.
Or preparing us for a future that they already understand is on its way.
Exactly.
Yeah. What do you think, Bruce?
Yeah, well, I again, no evidence of that, but it's something that many investigators have talked about. And are these aliens from the future? Well, I'm told by the physicists that you can go forward in time, but you can't go back in time. So I guess I'll have to talk to a physicist to find out if that's even possible. But I can see the logic in it, but I don't know if you have to violate known physical laws for that to happen.
Thanks to all of our callers. Dr. Bruce Rapuano, Dominion Lost is a terrific book. I learned a lot in this. I think you cover some ground that nobody has ever covered before, nobody with your credentials, about the implants, about how the brain waves function. And then we didn't even get into the whole Bob Lazar section where you did a pretty interesting analysis about his claims, Element 115. I suspect you and I might have to talk again sometime.
I would love to talk about the Bob Lazar Lazar story with you. You're the person who introduced the world to Bob Lazar, so that I would greatly look forward to that, George.
Look, I applaud your courage in coming forward with this. I know you're going to get all kinds of grief from colleagues. I hope it's not too terrible for you and that there are some good things that could come out with it. I suspect there's a lot of people in the scientific community who are going to want to talk to you now that you've come out and admitted a lifetime of experiences. Bruce Rapuano, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, George.
All right. The Dominion Lost is the name of the book. Hope you'll all check that out. Coming up next, Mark Hartzman, We Are Not Alone. Terrific book that we'll be discussing.